on this computer. All right, everybody, this is Sheets, and I have two either legends already or legends to be. I don't know, but Max and Dan Steinberg, these two guys, and again, I don't even know. I presume you guys are brothers. Would that be, I don't know if that's bad.
We're identical twins.
Yeah, I mean, again, I would presume, you know.
Yeah.
So they are part of a site called SaberSim, and the reason why I got involved with it in the first place is I know Andy Baldacci, who is, I guess, CEO or whatever, back from poker. And as you guys all know, I always look for great tools that are just a little different. And I must have spent, I didn't tell these guys this pre-show, but about maybe 20 hours on, watching their faces on videos, like going over this site. I went through Max's series on, he did a whole series on preparing for the live final with the NFL last year. And I was following that. And so these guys are just overall just super sharp guys. And what I want to do is go over their software, because quite honestly, I use it literally every day. People ask me, what I use to build my lineups, and I don't want to show it, whatever, but this is what I use to build my lineups. And it's what I used, not to be results oriented, but what you guys remember when I got second in that Yahoo thing, I was just as lazy as a human being could be. I didn't even want to play Yahoo because I don't even like playing football, but Bobby begged me to play. So, I'm going to play Yahoo too. I did my projections for it, so I may as well do it, but it was really late. I'm like, you know what? Let me just upload my projections into the SaberSim, run the thing, and just have it spit out lineups. It spit out the lineups. I looked at it. I'm like, I can't. None of these have any chance, but I'm just going to throw them in anyway. And one of them hit for 50,000. So I was going to have these guys anyway, but I figured that would be a good time to at least push this. First of all, I guess I'll do some quick gun shows. How did you guys get into DFS, and how did you guys come up with the idea of SaberSim?
Danny, you want to take it? Yeah.
Sure, I'll try. First off, we didn't come up with the idea of SaberSim. A guy named Matt, who was another partner, started SaberSim, and me and Max were just some guys who read his articles on Fangraphs and asked him some random questions about how the sim works and what would happen if you put different. I asked him about like different baseball lineups in the sim and how that works, and what kind of upside a lineup with like 4 Mike Trouts and 5 Ivan Novas would be. And we kind of started talking, and me and Max, we tracked, how well his site, SaberSim projections would do, and how well his sports betting tools did at actually predicting the outcomes of games, and they did a really good job. So it was kind of like, we should really, see if Matt would want to partner up with me and Max and 2 of our other friends, Andy and Julian, and see if we can maybe help grow the site more.
So yeah. So let me just go back, because you guys know I'm always really honest about how little I know and how much I know. So what I am like I was like most GPP players, right? I would subscribe to the main sites, and to try to build lineups. Look, I could hand build one lineup, whatever, but if I wanted to try to do multiple lineups, I would take their optimizers, I would use their projections, and you try to run lineups. But right from the beginning, what didn't sit well with me, and again, this is from my hedge fund world, is what these sites do is they default to median projections, right? So median projections, not to get into too much of the math, is basically what's going to be in the middle of a string of projections, right? Of a string of results, whether it be 500 or whatever. They rank from bottom to top, and the one that's literally with the right in the middle, not the mean, but the median, right in the middle, same amount on either side. And what people do is they upload those results, that median, into optimizers, and they spit out results. And what you're going to get is a collection of lineups with average results, right? So when you're playing cash games or you're looking for kind of average results, maybe that's not the worst idea in the world. But when you're trying to play something where you don't mind getting bad results, as long as you could trade those off for really good ones, that's not really what you're looking to do. So that was my first issue in general. So I'm like, there's got to be some place that does it better. Now there are some places that you could put in ceiling projections and whatever it is. So fair enough. The other thing is what really fascinated me about DFS in general was how correlations work and how they work differently across different sports, right? We're going to build a baseball build here, probably because, you know, between that and hockey, these are the two just kind of uber correlated sports. Well, we could talk about the esports, the LOL one of these days, you know, but fortunately I don't have to do that again. So baseball and hockey are kind of the uber correlated sports. And then you have like the uber uncorrelated sports like golf and to some extent auto racing. And then you have kind of like the cool ones in the middle, like basketball and football, where there's certain layers of correlation, and you'll get people argue over which is, you know, what you need as far as high correlation, low correlation. So very few of the optimizers properly, at least in my opinion, accounted for that. You know, you knew instinctively that, okay, I wanted to put a quarterback with a wide receiver, a quarterback with a tight end, or that, but they never was able to really quantify it in a really meaningful way. So that was the second thing that was bothering me. And the third thing that was bothering me, and this is the what I call the Nobel Prize of DFS, is the whole idea of scarcity and ownership and picking guys that are lower owned, and the trade-off between giving up a certain amount of projection upside for ownership upside, so to speak. Like, and this was in my head, you know, if two guys have, let's just use median projections for example, both have median projection of 25. Okay, one guy has an ownership of projection ownership of 10, other guy's an ownership of 20. Obviously, you want the guy with 10, but how much more, right? And likewise, even more fun is if you have one guy that projects to get about 25 and another guy projects to get about like 23, you know, what kind of ownership discount is worth that discrepancy in projection? You know, so to build lineups to put all of that together between, you know, correlation, getting rid of the whole median situation and interlaying ownership, I felt as if there was a site that did that, that would be the nuts, to turn a poker phrase, right? And not to say that SaberSim is the end all be all and they figured all that out, but I feel as though that of all the sites that I am a subscribe to, they do the best job of it. And when you build lineups through them, through these sites, it really spits out, and not to say spit, when you say spit out, you kind of like it's almost like insulting the idea, the process, right?
I use that term too. So.
Right. But the types of lineups you get, you'll find are just a little bit different than some of the others. So first of all, again, you've marketed this like so often the same way. I don't want you to repeat yourselves, but what if anything that I said rings true to you? What did I miss? What are your thoughts on anything that I just said? Any of you?
Max, if I say stuff first,
yeah, go ahead.
You can go. Okay, yeah. So I mean, first off, the fact that you got second in the Yahoo tournament is great, but it also shows that like, and many of our customers do actually win daily fantasy tournaments, that our lineup optimizer, because it can take into consideration correlations, ownership, and actual upside, that it is actually capable of giving you lineups that will win a big GPP tournament. I don't know if that's necessarily true for every single lineup builder out there. So it's really nice to get that validation from customers that, hey, we're actually, you know, winning tournaments with these lineups that your lineup builder is making. So that's not surprising, or I guess it's great to have that validation. The other thing is, you know, for me, like a lot of the problems I have with these lineup optimizers is, you're right, like they're taking into account median projection. They're not taking into account the upside of an individual player. They're just giving you, okay, what is the best projected lineup based on all these median projections? And that may not be the highest upside lineup that's going to get you to win a tournament. The other thing is, like with our simulator, we can actually figure out like what the theoretical correlations between players are, and we quantify that when giving your optimal lineups. With other lineup builders, you basically just have to use heuristics, which is like, you know, let's put a defense in a running back together
Yep.
in every lineup I make. And the problem with that is those heuristics are like completely imperfect. Like you may not actually want every lineup you have to have a defense and a running back stacked together. That may not be in every optimal lineup. With SaberSim, we can quantify that so that we can say, okay, should we put some defense that doesn't have a running back or does not match with the running back in this lineup? Or is there a defense that's better that may not be as highly correlated, that's just so much better that it's more optimal to put in? So I think using the fact that SaberSim can quantify rather than you have to put in all these rules and heuristics to make your lineups optimal, I think SaberSim just does a way better job and takes way less time.
From I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. From a top-down perspective, I mean, everybody who wants to play, and especially who wants to play MTTs or GPPs, especially if they have other stuff going on, the most precious thing that you can't really ever get back is time. Okay, and for those of you that are in your 20s, you can't quite grasp this as much as someone like me. Like I'm 53, and I multitask all day long. I always have a lot of stuff going on, and yet still, just the day just flies, right? And then God forbid I say, okay, I want to build lineups, and oh my heaven forbid someone gets injured or something like that. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right? And what I found is I was kind of a perfectionist, and what I found is when I was building my lineups using the other optimizers, I would spend about 60% of my time making these rules. I would go in there, I would say, okay, I want at least one of this and one of that, except if this guy's in there and this guy there, there's this, because in my head, I feel as though that, Fuller and Cook shouldn't be together, but can't really quantify why. But so let's just pay maybe at least one of those. But in some other games, I'm like, maybe these guys are cheaper, so I wouldn't mind taking all three of those. And then, oh, great, I got to remember, I can't play like two centers in basketball against one another, or I don't want to play these two bench guys together, or oh, and then I got to do this, that. God forbid you have three sports going on, and you have to go through like all the different rules, and you're typing them in manually, and this, that, and the other thing. And then God forbid you do it, and you hit like incorrect rules. They cross. Oh God, what do I do now? So that took up so much of my time that when I first looked at your video, I said, well, we know that. We know that you want to put defensive running back. And our algorithm kind of actually quantifies with each tipped or combination of running back and defense, for example, how much you want to put them together and what level of correlation there is between a certain quarterback and a wide receiver. And that just the time that you save, because again, you want to be perfect. The people that are playing this, they want to win. So even the people that are smart, they know that they should be putting groups together. Yet it's so freaking time consuming to get that stuff done that the fact that something like this does that for you is pretty freaking cool. We're going to get to probably the coolest thing in a second when I actually do this, but let me just kind of go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback on that. I think, there's a lot of products out there that build lineups, right? And most of them, as Danny's saying, they just take a different approach to us from solving the same problem. They solve the problem by giving people as much control as possible to make sure they have good upside, to cap ownership. They'll have ownership rules to get the perfect correlations. And we're taking a different approach. We try to do it quantitatively. We say, okay, we've simulated all these games. Let's just actually crunch these numbers for you and say, okay, this is what we think are the best groups of players that you should have together. These are the best lineups given all these factors. And you don't have to set those rules. You don't have to do this thing. So I think for some people, they want all that control. And I think some of the, sometimes it's good for them. There's professionals where they want to, down to a science, make sure this player is definitely not in lineup with this player. And I think what that ends up doing is it can limit lineups in a way where you lose good lineups from your build, right? You now X out a lineup that doesn't have a running back and a defense together that actually may have been your top lineup. So you have no way of knowing that because you're setting all these rules that are going to make it so that lineup never shows up.
Yeah.
So I think basically we're all trying to solve the same issue. I just think with SaberSim, it's a different approach. We're saying, let's do this from a quantitative standpoint instead of a heuristic rule setting standpoint.
And it's funny, even the experts, you'd be surprised when faced with actual numbers, how, I would say, humbling it could be. And here's an example of something I come across a lot, which you actually went over in one of your videos. I would run, I'd put my projection in, I'd run a simulation with your thing, and then I'm like, you know what, I really want to have like 10% of, say, Le'Veon Bell, like, for example, okay? It's not giving me any, all right? So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to force it. I'm going to put 10% Le'Veon Bell into the thing. And then, like, it's almost like the simulator just goes freaking haywire. It says, boy, if you want to do that, we're going to have to expand your pool. You're going to have to do that. And the more, then what happens is it forces this in, this in. And after a while, I start thinking, you know what? Maybe I really just shouldn't be getting 10% of Le'Veon Bell in the first place.
I hope this happened last week because Le'Veon Bell had a terrible
It was
game.
actually. And
really, I also liked Le'Veon Bell and
yeah.
wanted to force him into lineups, but I didn't.
But I can't tell you how many times, like, just like, I'm like, maybe it's like SaberSim's almost saying, are you really sure you want 10% of this guy? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. So this is the main thing. What we're going to do is, just for fun, we're going to do the DraftKings, the two gamer on I was going to do it FanDuel because your DraftKings thing hadn't updated in a while. It was a little slow to update today, but it's all up there now. So I want to show you. So first of all, there are things that you have that everybody has, right? So they do have their projections on here, and the other thing, but we're not going to do that. We're going to have some fun. So it also allows you to update your own projections, right? So it has a my projection and it has a SaberSim projection. Actually, this is my projection, which is default in the SaberSims. It rates it by value, ceiling, and then you have your ownership projections, then my ownership projections, which default to it. But like anything else, you could, if you want, insert your own. So I actually have that. So let's let's for fun, let's actually let's put the ownership. We're going to keep your ownership the same. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload data, and then I'm just going to, these are my own projections. And you can already see, by the way, that when I hit upload projection, what it's going to do, the only player that's going to be missing is the name player, because player doesn't exist. Right? So,
I also just keep
player does not exist.
Yeah.
So what this did is it uploaded all of my projections in here. And now, if for whatever reason I left the guy out, it's going to keep the SaberSim projections. Like Will Smith, for whatever reason, I didn't have him projected to play today, or whatever it is. And so I got to look at that. Again, this is early in the thing. So it uploads all my stuff and it keeps their ownership projections. And this is where you kind of start. Now, right here, you just go click on new build. And now is where kind of like the fun starts, right? So you have these sliders here, and they default. Well, actually, I think they default to the last time that I set them, maybe. I'm not sure.
No, I think this is actually our
okay.
default settings.
Okay.
It depends. Yeah, so we have default settings based on what kind of slate it is, right? Like if this was a 10-game slate, they would look different. When it's a showdown or a 2-game slate, I think these are actually the proper settings.
Okay, now
which are sort of they're a little more like crazy than other ones, or like a little more aggressive, I would say. Crazy might not be the best word.
So the first thing you'll find, by the way, in baseball is that when you get to a 2-game slate, this box gets checked. Allow batters versus opposing pitchers. You got whatever it is. SaberSim has decided that the 3-game slate, we're not going to allow them. In the 2-gamers, we are. I think that's the cutoff. But you can untoggle this if you want. Right. And again, you could change any of this if you want. But so it has these different things like style, entry limit, entrance. But before we change this, we should talk about what all of these things kind of mean, right? So correlation, it's kind of like you're deciding how much correlation that you want. In other words, obviously, you have 2 guys that project, I guess, that hit net near each other. That's, those guys correlate with one another, whatever. And so, that's correlation is kind of logical. And ownership fade is high. The higher you kind of swing this off to the right, probably the more it's going to weight the lower owned players. Now, smart diversity. Tell me what this is.
Yeah, so that's my cue. So would you actually mind Xing out of this and just clicking on a player? Like click on one of the player projections, because I feel like this illustrates it really well. So like SaberSim, as we've talked about a little bit, is our projections. Like when you see the average projections on the My Projection, that isn't just, okay, we're calculating like we think he's going to get a half a single and 2 home run or a 0.2 home runs or something like that. We're actually simulating all the games thousands of times and then just looking at what the average projection was for that player based on, okay, in this at bat, he has an X probability of getting a single, an X probability of getting double, an X probability of striking out. So it's sort of less of a calculation and more, or less of like a simple calculation and more of just a calculation of what actually happened in the simulation, which is going to be really close to what you would just, we put out as their average.
So that is going to be, so that answers an interesting question. So your initial projections that you put up there are not median projections. They are the median of the simulated.
Yeah, we're not projecting how someone's going to do in a game to start off. We're projecting the probability of them getting a single, a double, like every at bat, we're saying, what is the probability of each outcome given the situation, given who they're facing, the team, the park, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're simulating all the games and just taking the average projection. In the same way you get, so this graph is the range of outcomes. You get, okay, how is this player correlated to other players given the outcomes of the simulations? Everything we do is based on simulating every game thousands of times. That's different than you'd see in other projection systems where they're just saying, okay, what do I estimate this player is going to do for the game? And what that allows us to do is get really awesome data, one of which is very simple, is correlation data, right? It's how players are going to score together or do poorly together. So in baseball, everyone knows like players are correlated to each other. The reason is people get, if someone gets a run, it means another player gets an RBI. If a team does well, it means the players are getting more at bats. And so you can see that all these players on the same team are correlated to each other. In the same way, hitters opposing a pitcher are reverse correlated. If the pitcher does well, the hitters do badly. If the hitters do well, the pitcher does badly. Yeah, you can.
Sorry, can I just add to this? I mean, so I used to have a model I used for baseball, which would estimate the correlations based on the spot in the order. But the reality is these correlations really depend on the individual attributes of individual players. Like a great example would be in football, a running back who catches a lot of passes is going to be a lot more correlated to a QB than one that doesn't. So what SaberSim is able to do is able to figure out what the theoretical correlations are based on what the attributes of these individual players are. So you have like Freddie Freeman is very correlated with Acuna. Sometimes guys next to each other in the order have attributes that are more correlated than different players with different attributes, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Like if you look at like Freeman is second the order, Acuna's leadoff. If you look at the Dodgers, whoever's second the order for them, the correlation is going to be a little different because the attributes of those players are a little different.
Yeah, I think another thing that's interesting, if you look at relief pitchers, right, is these relief pitchers are actually correlated to Acuna. And the reason is because if Ronald Acuna has a good game, it means they're getting into the game. Yep. Right. So it can be counterintuitive. It's very interesting. But you can see the starting pitcher, Urias, it's like a negative 0.31 correlation. So they're very anti-correlated.
Now these mild correlations to the I don't want to spend too much time, but these mild correlations to the Dodger hitters, is that a function of maybe the park? In other words, are the parks playing a certain way? These guys are going to correlate, or is it more just I always struggle with this, whether there's a thing, right, where there's like a game flow thing with baseball. Like if one team scores a lot, the other team will be more apt to be allowed to score back or something.
I think
like
part of it has to do with extra innings.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Maybe almost all of it.
Oh,
so like, I think maybe people in the bottom of the order are going to get like, I don't know where Pollock is projected, but maybe he gets in an extra innings game, gets the most expected at bats more than other Dodgers players. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also, I mean, it could have to do with just also there's a little something to do with if a road team scores a lot, it means the home team is going to get the bottom of the ninth inning. So there's something there as well.
Yeah, the other
Uh,
thing is, what if one team gets up a lot, maybe someone's pulled, and that would result in a negative correlation though.
Right.
So that would probably pull it more.
Yeah, there's nuance. There's a lot of nuance to it.
So I have a question. So if let's just say that you put your own projections in here, right?
Yeah.
Now, when you run your simulation, does that still, I don't want to say randomize it or whatever, does that still take into account the correlation of these players, or is that already done by the time the projection gets put into the system?
Yeah, so it's actually a problem that we thought a lot about because it's interesting. It's, we want to keep the integrity of what we're doing with taking into account the adjustment of projections, and we can't just adjust them. We're not going to take your projection and just adjust all these probabilities and run the sims again. That would be kind of insane, right? What we do is we basically add a multiplier at the end based on it. So let's say a simulation has, depending on how you're running it, let's say the simulations have Tyler Glasnow doing X amount given how we're building your lineups. Your projection is lower. What we're going to do is at the end of the entire process, this is how I understand it. Now, I wonder if Matt would correct me. I'm pretty sure this is how it works, is we basically just multiply down our number for Tyler Glasnow based on the proportion difference, right?
Okay.
So we're doing everything based on our simulations, but then we're just sort of using a multiplier to take into account your adjustment from SaberSim's projection, right?
Yep.
And so, just going back to these build settings and what is smart diversity, right?
Yeah,
so correlation, right? It's how much you want to account for the actual correlation data that we have from these simulation numbers, right? Ownership fade, that's going to be just a score. We just score how much the lineup is, like how much the ownership of the lineup is based on, like, given maybe another lineup and give it a bonus score versus a lower score. Smart diversity, I feel like, is probably the most unique feature, and I think one of the most helpful features. Is essentially what it is how small a bucket of simulations do you want to build each lineup from, right? So, and I'll explain that in a little more detail. So if you set it at 0 smart diversity, what that means is we're going to take every simulation, so that's going to be close to 10,000, I think, and we're going to build your lineups off of the average projection of 10,000 simulations. So it's just going to be the average projection, right? But as you move it to the right, what it's saying is we're going to take less of a bucket of simulations to build each lineup, right? So if you set it at 10, what that means is we're going to take one simulation, the data from one chosen simulation, and use use what actually happens from that simulation to build the optimal lineup, right? So what that would mean is, let's say, think about this and how this might happen in real life. Let's say the Dodgers blow out the Braves 10-1, and Tampa Bay and Houston have like a 2-3 game or something, right? We're going to take those one simulations of each game, and we're going to say, okay, what happened in that? Okay, AJ Pollock had 2 home runs. Cody Bellinger had a home run. Ronald Acuna, who is a 10-point projected player, struck out 4 times. Yep. We're going to build a lineup based on that. So you're not going to get Acuna. You're going to get Bellinger and Pollock. Maybe Pollock is not as good as some other outfielder that you have a choice to choose, but we're going to choose him because we're just optimizing for that one simulation, right? And so the reason on 2-game slates that we have smart diversity set that to that high is instead of trying to optimize for what is the highest projected lineup, when you're in a 2-game slate, you just want to optimize for like what the best lineup is given what might happen, right? And so we're saying, okay, given what might happen, this is the best lineup. And that might have some weird lineups, right? Like sometimes what might happen is the Astros were the lowest projected point total on the slate,
Yep.
are going to have a crazy game. They're going to hit a bunch of home runs, and you're going to stack them. So it's a way, and we do this every time we build new lineups. We're going to build a new lineup, use one simulation from each game, build that lineup. Then we're going to choose new simulations, build another lineup, and keep doing that. And what that ends up doing is, if you use another optimizer, right, you use 2 unique players, 3 unique players. They have some way of diversifying. What we do is we diversify actually based on what is the actual outcome that could happen in this game. And so it allows you to diversify your lineups without having to trade off as much of making that much worse lineups. You're still taking a bucket of the highest projected lineups, the highest upside lineups possible. So it's a really cool tool to basically get diversity in your lineups without actually having to sacrifice that much.
I will tell you this. I mean, I don't know. I used to go on the SaberSim Slack chat or whatever every once in a while.
Yeah.
It's just too many. I just can't do it. But if you play baseball, for example, and you use this system, and you pin this thing all the way to the right with the smart diversity, you'll be playing a lot of stacks of teams that you're not going to want to play. But it's for your own good. You know what I mean? Like, because because sometimes they hit.
Baseball is so hard to predict. So that kind of strategy often works pretty well.
So for those who've been following along, all right. So let's see if we can't predict like where sliders are going to go. So like right now it's set to GPP 20 max, right? So I'm going to predict that if it goes to, let's say I made it cash, I would imagine correlation. I would guess they probably all pin to the left, or at least close to it, right?
I think you're correct.
Let's see.
Yes.
There it is, right? You want to know why? Because in cash games, you don't necessarily need correlation. You don't care about ownership. And again, you want to have the most amount of simulations possible, to generate that bucket, so that's right. Now, if you were going to go, not multiplier, GPP, if you were going to do 150 max, let's see. This is interesting.
It doesn't really change anything.
It doesn't really change all that much. Okay.
If you go, basically, I would say with every slider, the more you're playing sort of a conservative contest, like a cash game or something where you're not trying to get as much upside, you're going to want to be more to the left. If you're trying to play a contest that's like a winner take all, a satellite, it's going to be like mostly all to the right.
And by the way, as a user, I'm gonna, the first step is admitting it. It was very tempting, like right from the beginning. I'm playing GPPs. I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna put everything to the right.
Yeah.
It's gonna provide me the most upside and no problem.
That may not be bad. I mean, in general, as a rule of thumb, like the more top heavy the tournament, the larger the field, you want more correlation, more ownership fade, more smart diversity. I think it can be a little confusing of like why correlation is low or set to moderate. It's like, we want maximum correlation, right? The thing is, smart diversity and the outcomes of the simulations are kind of already considering correlation. Correlation is just how players scoring moves together, right? So the simulation, like in our simulation, we have Acuna and Freeman right next to each other in the order, and therefore their results are going to be correlated. So the smart diversity really kind of takes into account correlation already, and that's why we don't like completely max it out just because we're doing like a top heavy GPP.
And you talked about this, I remember this. You talked about this in your description of the LOL stuff. That it's an incredibly highly correlated sport. So why would the correlation be pinned all the way to the left? Well, because the smart diversity is pinned all the way to the right. It kind of takes care of that a little bit.
Right.
All right. So you have this, and then you do this, and it says build your player pool. And then I never know exactly what if anything's actually going on in the background. These GIFs, whatever it is, analyzing, building.
It is.
Okay.
It costs us a lot of money.
Right. So here's the fun part, right? So it spits out. It produces the lineups, right? And it lists 20 lineups here. And this, I think, is just so cool. Like it lists 20 lineups, but it's like, it's got another like couple of hundred of them kind of like just waiting to like.
Actually, it's 1,000 total. Yeah.
Oh, is that what this means?
Full
1,000?
size,
Full size?
1,000 means we make you 1,000 lineups. So if
Right.
you want to adjust the ownerships or anything, or you
Right.
get some injured player,
So
we can just swap in different lineups that don't include.
right, and we're going to get to the adjusting in a second. So enlist,
Right.
and look, it's the same as all the other optimizers. You could download these, upload these to the to the sites, easy breezy. I mean, just like anything else. And so
Do you mind if I do a little rant on the top lineup?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so I think one thing that's interesting is like, okay, so a lot of lineup optimizers, you would never make lineups with allowing players from opposing teams because it doesn't know how to quantify that. Like you wouldn't want to get negatively correlated players on opposing teams. In this top lineup, we actually get one player on Tampa Bay, even though he's going against Greinke. And one thing that's interesting is it's a bottom of the order player. So these bottom of the order players don't face the starting pitcher as much as the top of the order players. So you can actually have like an optimal lineup where you have some bottom of the order players or one bottom of the order player facing the opposing pitcher. You would never get this lineup with any other simulator, or I mean, sorry, with any other lineup builder, but this lineup may very well win a GPP and is probably going to be unique because people are just not making lineups that are even capable of putting together a lineup that's optimal, that has the pitcher and like one opposing hitter.
All right.
If that makes sense.
Yep. So I'm going to tease people a little bit. There's something I'm going to ask people, and then we're going to get back to it in a second. So if you look at these, it shows the projected score of the first one is 84, right? And the projected one of the second one is 91. So I'll let you guys think about that. You guys already know the answer. Like, so why would this lineup be 84 and this one be 91? And, you know, why would this be ranked higher? We're going to come back to that because this is part of the Nobel Prize that I just alluded to a little earlier. But before you even do that, like you could look and see what was created, right? So you look at the different types of stacks that were created. So this was all team stacks. So it shows you have 75% of Tampa, 65% of LA, 60% of whatever. And within this, you can make little changes. So like, for example, let's just say that I wanted to make maximum exposure of Tampa 50%. When I do that, it's like magic. Like all of these things on the right just instantly change. And it doesn't even, but it's kind of like weird in a way because it doesn't say changing lineups, updating lineups. It just happens. And you never see it because you're staring over at the left. So you don't really ever see anything change, but it has. And everything that you change over here when you're trying to update this, or tweak it, it automatically just produces the top 20 lineups ranked in, well, we'll get back to how it's ranked in a minute, okay? So that's the team stacks, and then stack types. So it lets you kind of look at, okay, so you have 40% of the 5-2s, 15% 4-2-2s, and kind of right down the line. And again, if you want to, you could do minimum exposure, maximum exposure, and things like that. And then likewise, you could go into players and separate it by pitchers, see where your exposure lies, and all of that. One thing you guys haven't done the late swap stuff yet, have you?
No.
Not yet. Okay.
It's something that we're eventually going to add.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I said, you could change all this if you want. Like, you for whatever reason don't feel comfortable. But I've honestly found that you do the work first with your projections, and you know, either trust your pitcher or don't. I try to not screw around with this that much, and you'll see what'll happen. Like, let's say I can't really force it on a 2-game slate; it's a little harder. But like, what I could do, let's say that I wanted, you know, a minimum of like say 80% of Kyle Wright. It's really going to struggle to get me there. It's gonna like make me like expand my pool, expand my lineups, kind of like that thing I mentioned earlier. Are you sure you really want to do this? You know, I guess you could do it, but you know, I again, this is just my own advice. I necessarily wouldn't. So the other thing that you'll notice, and this is going to be tough to deal with, is when it comes to all of SaberSim, really, you're going to get a lot of lineups that leave money on the table. I don't know whether that's because of the way you're ranking them by Saber score, which we're going to get to in a second, But you're going to have to either live with that or not. And it happens a lot. Like I see, God forbid you play Showdown and you run these things. I mean, like you get like you're leaving 6,000 on the table and stuff like that. And I'll let you guys talk about that if you guys notice that and if that bothers you in any way. It doesn't really bother me too much. For me, the numbers are the numbers, and it is what it is. But you will definitely see lineups on the table. And like, for example, the other day, I'm like, all right, I have these lineups. They're doing pretty well. I'm like, I could swap the worst player in the world for Altuve right now and not cost myself and still get it within my lineup. But now I'm like, if I do that, am I compromising the integrity of my process? Like if I do that and then the original thing, which is going to be obviously like 1/20th the ownership, because who is doing that, comes in, it's going to really like kind of annoy me. So before I get to Saber score, tell me if you've noticed this at all about the leaving money on the table.
Yeah, and I would say for baseball, I would say I'm happy about it. I mean, this is the reality is especially for hitters, baseball is extremely hard to predict. Our projections are very good, and the R squared we get on our daily fantasy projections is like 0.04 or something.
So R squared means
actually
R squared
right.
For those who don't know, that's the amount it varies from the expected, pretty much.
Right. So which is basically means you can almost not predict with any accuracy how well any hitter is going to do on any given day. So which is kind of like, this is something you have to realize as like a sports betting professional or a daily fantasy professional is like, you're not going to get it right all the time. So I think with baseball, where it's, I think, the most unpredictable sport, leaving salary on the table is going to be like in optimal lineups for sure. Like there's going to be stacks that, you would have, if you put a 5 stack of some team in like a 2-game slate, you're going to leave like 5,000 or 6,000 on the table. But there's going to be some outcomes where that terrible team scores the most runs out of all the teams because baseball is unpredictable. So I think it's like a feature that, we are actually giving you lineups that do leave salary on the table.
I'll tell you the other thing, by the way, we don't need to get too much into this, but in football, you know what I notice in football when I run these, I get more triple stacks than I would ever have imagined. And it's funny because one of the first videos I watched was you going over your approach to the the live final, and I don't know if you actually went with it, but you were at least considering the 3-man the 3 stack as your entry in it. It was like quarterback with 3 receivers or something like that.
Yeah, it's Kyler Murray with Kenyon Drake and Gerald and Christian Kirk.
And I find it interesting because it's not normal. I was saying it's not normal. It's not standard for GPP players to want to do that. To play three receivers to 1 quarterback, and it's recommending more of them. Let's put it that way than I would expect. Have you noticed that? Does that mean anything to you? Or
yeah, I think people are just way too risk averse, especially when it's coming to GPPs, because it's like, people, they want to make the perfect lineup, right? And the perfect lineup is usually going to look like a 1 or 2 stack, right? Yeah. And they're going to want to get all their perfect players and so on and so forth. But especially if you're building multiple lineups and you're trying to win, the millionaire maker, right? It's $1 million first, and the prize pool's can be like $3 million. Right. You want to build a lineup that's going to win. And it's like, sometimes at 3 stack, you're going to say, God, I wish I didn't 3 stack because this one guy sucked and the other 2 guys were good. But it still gives you your best chance of having a really amazing lineup that's going to win, because those players are really correlated with your quarterback, and you're going to usually want to trade off playing that 3rd wide receiver rather than playing someone who's a couple points higher projected, who's not correlated with your quarterback at all.
Well, for me, it was actually the opposite. So when I would see a quarterback with 3 receivers, I would always instinctively think that didn't have enough upside, because I would think that 1 wide receiver just would be taking away from the other wide receiver. I always was kind of taught, or I thought that,
well,
no, sorry, I mean, they do have
that is true. That is true, but they're also much more correlated with the QB
Yeah.
than they are negatively correlated with each other, or they
Okay.
may even have small positive correlations.
Right.
I mean, just going off of what Max said, like basically you are looking for, like, if your QB doesn't throw like 4 touchdowns and 300 yards, you're not going to win a GPP.
Right. Yep.
So, but when that happens, there are going to be a lot of receivers on that team that have really good games. And then conversely, there's probably going to be a receiver on the other team that also has a pretty good game, because the other team's going to have to pass a lot to catch up.
Yeah.
So you're really trying to take advantage of these very extreme outcomes. And in these very extreme QB outcomes, you have a lot of wide receivers on one team that do very, very well.
All right, I want to ask a random question about basketball in a minute, but before I don't want to forget about this. So when the default ranking of these lineups is not by projected score, it's by SaberScore. Now you could tell me what that is, but again, my opinion is that this is, your attempt to rank lineups based on upside and lack of ownership, and just what types of lineups have the most juice. I guess that's the best way I could describe it. So, I mean, I guess you can't get into how you calculate this, but tell me where you came up with the idea. I guess it's easy, but where you came up with the idea of SaberScore, is that kind of a decent assessment of what that is?
I would say we can definitely talk about it.
Okay.
We did not come up with the idea. Matt Hunter, who's the founder.
I mean, you too. I mean, Saber.
Right. But it basically is just a number. We set all the sliders, right? We set a correlation slider, we set an ownership slider, and we set smart diversity slider. So basically it's just the score that we're getting based on all those factors. So the lineup gets a better score if it's more correlated. The lineup gets a better score if it has a lower sort of ownership of certain players, right? And also, my understanding is if you're building with the highest smart diversity, this also has to do with what the actual outcome actually was, right? So if SaberScore is 130, it means this line, or 139, it means plus some score for ownership and correlation. This lineup probably scored around 130 points in the actual outcome of the simulation. And that was the best lineup that came out of that, right?
Yeah.
And so this is probably a lineup where a lot of these guys had home runs, right? That probably a lot of the pitchers did not do very well. That's why it's sort of punting Kyle Wright and actually using some Dodgers. I assume in this simulation, these simulations, no pitcher did really well. It just made sense that Kyle Wright actually was one of the best, and there's a lot of scoring, right? So it just has to do with those numbers. And it's sometimes the projection score is going to be technically worse, but the SaberScore is better. That's really good, because it means this lineup sort of has some hidden value that's not apparent in the average projections.
Now, I'm going to get to some other sports in a second, but one thing I also noticed about basketball, and I did a lot of this for basketball, is that, and again, I talked about how different sports have different, assessments of how much correlation matters, right? Everybody kind of agrees baseball and hockey, correlate, and everybody, for the most part, agrees that golf and auto racing or whatever, MMA, or they don't correlate. But where it gets really, really kind of battleground, right, is in basketball, about how much these guys actually correlate, and also, how these, the run backs and the correlation actually exists or not between the team that they're playing against, and even you guys, I've heard sometimes, like, yeah, we want to, game stack, but then it's really not as much of a correlation as you think. It's just more, these guys just going to just do well on their own. You don't really need to be pushed by the other team to get your ceiling or something like that. And I think it's kind of neat that it's not exactly figured out, how much correlation matters in NBA. Now, again, NBA is now over, but it's going to be starting up again soon. Any words of wisdom with respect to that?
I mean, so we're working. So with basketball correlations, they definitely don't matter that much. They're pretty small. I mean, really, you have these extreme outcomes where games go to double or triple overtime. Right. And in those outcomes, obviously, starters on opposing teams are pretty correlated. But when that doesn't happen, that's not necessarily the case. We're working on being cognizant of all the lineup combinations a team is going to use during the game. And once we do that, I think we'll have a really good idea of exactly how people or have better correlations in terms of how people actually do when they play together.
Okay.
So yeah, I think with basketball in general, correlations don't matter that much, and like the real strong correlation is between like a point guard who gets a lot of assists and like someone who gets a lot of assisted field goals on the team.
What about
and that's not even that high correlation.
what about teams with the opposing team now?
Sometimes
I think
it's
the problem
negative,
is right. So the problem is like a lot of times if like a team gets blown out, the team that does the blowing out has a lot of rebounds and steals and blocks, and the team that got blown out did really badly. So there's also negative correlation on the outcomes. So it's tricky.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's some things that are just honestly hard to simulate, right? It's like we're simulating a game, but how do you simulate like a coach's decision in the fourth quarter? Like we don't try to do that. And there's probably something, right? It's like, if a team starts doing badly or goes on a bad run, does the coach just replace the player quicker? You have players who have really high minute games out of nowhere. There's some things that have to do with coaches' decision making that we're just not going to use. So I think there's I don't think our correlations in any sport are perfect, but they're probably the best that you can do, and we're always working on improving them. But there's also hidden stuff, right? It's like sometimes there's hard things that are hard that have real world correlation, but are actually hard to quantify in a simulation.
Yeah.
Just so you guys, everybody knows, I mean, they have it for I guess all the sports. I mean,
yeah.
And I was
not even sports.
We had time on our hands during the pandemic.
And the LOL, unfortunately, if you ever need to really upgrade that one, it provide a very, very small pool of lineups for whatever reason. And you weren't, I guess different sports are able to screw around with these exposures a little bit easier than others, right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, League of Legends is limited, although and it's just sporadic. We need I would say it's sort of in beta right now. It's something that but in all the video games and we don't simulate it, right? There's some sports that we actually do not simulate. League of Legends, CSGO, Call of Duty, those things are not simulations.
What about MMA, golf, and NASCAR?
MMA, NASCAR, I think we do simulate. MMA
simulations, yeah.
I'm not sure. Golf, sure, we do. Golf, I created the model. We definitely simulate.
Oh, you're awesome because
it's a hole by hole probability, right? It's not like an average projection where I basically made a model that, and we don't have it for Euro, but we do have it for PGA. It might not be up yet, but it's a hole by hole probability, right?
Oh, no, my projections were already uploaded.
Right. But basically, for every hole, I have a model that assigns a probability of eagle, birdie, par, bogey, double bogey, triple bogey, or worse. And then we simulate it hole by hole and do it for the rounds, and that's how it works. Obviously, golfers are not correlated, so unless we somehow incorporated tee time and weather correlations, which we don't.
Weather there could be correlation,
but golf is a simulator.
Yeah, I use you guys stuff for golf all the time, and again, you'll see same thing. You'll get lineups with money left on the table,
right?
Which is fun. I like that. If I know there's a process behind, and then obviously because you're trying to get ownership fades, you'll get these 0.8% dudes throughout your builds, and I don't know. I think it's great. It's kind of good that no one's actually figured it out completely 100% because then the game would be over. But I really think that this approach, the balancing of ownership with actual, I won't say outlier outcomes, right? But actual real world outcomes that you want. So I guess with smart diversity, I guess one way of thinking about it is it'll keep searching until it gets one you like, and then it'll give you that one, or maybe not that.
It's basically it's choosing a bucket of simulations to build one lineup from, and then taking the best lineup from that bucket of simulations and then
Okay.
taking a new bucket and building another lineup.
And now, just so you know, guys, I mean, you can sort by projected score if you wanted to. You know, you could put, you know, projected score, and if you wanted to sort it this way, you know, look, it's your money. You could put in whatever lineups you want, right? So
Right.
you can look at it this way. But I never dealt with, so actual score, you could actually go back to previous slates?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So this is fun. So let's go back then. So October 8th, is that the last one?
I think so.
So let's,
So it keeps going to Euro for some reason, but go to PGA.
that's fine. So we'll go to PGA. And this was actually my projections back then. Oh, it saved it from when I did it back then.
Yeah.
And then we could go.
Go to your build, like just
okay.
click on, yeah.
We go new build, right?
You can click on your old build. to
Oh, okay,
like
we'll click on the old build.
possibly- Or were these from today?
Okay.
Are
And you
these
could do
for
this
the other
by,
tournaments, or-
It looks like we don't have actuals for that. It's possible we only do it for NFL and baseball and
oh, okay.
basketball, I'm not sure, or maybe this is something that we don't have up yet. I actually have never used that, so I'm not positive.
Does
Yeah,
this
that's-
save,
yeah, this is the first time it's doing
I
that.
wonder if this saves my build from last week. Does it save it server wide? In other words, does it
It
save it
looks
on the
like it.
site, you think?
Yeah.
Let's find out.
Yeah, it's kind of looking like it did.
Let's find, oh, that, I don't want new build. I wanted my old build, right? From October, week 5.
Yeah, that should be right. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so it looks like it's
Yeah,
only
this is-
for
this is-
football.
So now oh, by actual score, there you go. Okay. So by actual score, so these are my lineups by actual score, or the recommended lineups?
It was the out of the
I
pool
think-
of 1,500 that we built for you, what had the best actual score. So you might have not used this lineup.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's that. This is actually a pretty good tool then
Yeah.
to look back at your old stuff too. Yeah. So, I mean, this is great. And you know, when I mentioned to these guys before, I mean, I honestly just want to have them on because I think that you guys that watch me, you know, I'm really honest, and you guys want to know how I do things. And you know, these and SaberSim might not be the most well-known site in the world, but it's what I use, and they're not literally giving me a thing to do this. I'm just doing it seriously. I mean, I just want to present good content to everybody, and this is I think this is worth doing. I presume that you have like a free trial or something, and then
We have a 3-day free trial for
Okay.
any user.
yeah, and I think you guys are doing a great job, and keep it up. You guys have anything else you want to talk about? All right.
Not me.
All right,
Yeah.
sounds good. Hey, thanks guys for coming on. And boy, I really wanted to play. I really played James O'Shaughnessy. Did that really happen? You know,
No, I think
maybe not.
that's
It may
what
have
it's
just been in
saying.
your
Is
pool.
it was in your pool of lineups.
Oh, okay.
It sounds like you should have, basically.
Yeah, I had right. Yeah, I'm still dealing with my. You know, I almost got there. I think I played the showdown. I had like 60% Ferkser or something like that, and he almost scored a touchdown. Anyway, keep up the great work. You guys are really good for DFS. You're a great combination of great intelligence, and hey, I encourage you guys, if you want, watch their videos, because these guys do a really good job. Their banter back and forth is very strong. They communicate their stuff really well, and these are just two of the good guys in the industry.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you guys later. Thanks for coming on.
Okay.